Welcome to my philosophy channel. An old man climbed onto a water buffalo one afternoon and rode toward the mountains. He left no forwarding address. He had no students waiting for him on the other side. He simply disappeared, and the only reason we know he existed at all is that a border guard, legend says, stopped him at the pass and begged him to write something down before he vanished. What the old man left behind was 5,000 characters, a text so short it fits in an afternoon, so strange it takes a lifetime, and so precise in its strangeness that 2,500 years later people still argue about what it actually means. That text is the Tao Te Ching. And if you think you already know what Taoism is, if you picture incense and flowing robes and someone murmuring softly about going with the flow, stay with me. Because what this philosophy actually says is considerably more unsettling than that. This video runs a little long. If you stay with me to the end, you might see the Tao Te Ching and the way you move through your own life for what it actually is. Chapter 1. The Name That Kills the Thing. The first line of the Tao Te Ching is also its strangest move. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Before you have read a second sentence, the book has already told you that everything it is about to say is insufficient. It has warned you, in its opening breath, that the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon. Most philosophical texts spend their first pages establishing authority. This one begins by confessing its own limitation. This is not modesty, it is precision. Every word you speak about the world performs a small act of violence on reality. When you say river, you have already frozen something that moves. When you say self, you have drawn a boundary around something that has no clean edges. Language is a filing system, and reality does not file. The Tao Te Ching is a book that understands this problem and chooses to work inside it anyway, using paradox and contradiction the way a sculptor uses a chisel to remove what obscures rather than to add what impresses. Think about what happens when someone tells you to relax. The instruction creates tension. The word lands in your body, and your shoulders do not drop. They lift slightly, bracing against the demand. The same mechanism operates in language generally. The moment you name something, you have also named what it is not. You have created an inside and an outside. You have made a category, and categories exclude. The Tao precedes all categories. It is what categories are made of. The Taoists found a way around this. Instead of defining the Tao, they described it by what it resembles: water, a valley, an empty vessel, an uncarved block of wood. These images do not explain the Tao, they gesture toward it. They say, "Look at how water moves," and you will be closer to understanding than if I gave you a definition. The instruction is always indirect. The teaching always points past itself. What the Tao resembles, more than anything else, is the underlying pattern that makes things possible. Not the things themselves, but the condition in which things can arise. Not the music, but the silence that gives music shape. Not the words, but the grammar that allows them to mean anything at all. It existed, the text says, before heaven and earth, not as a God who created those things, but as the space in which creation becomes possible. The book that begins by saying, "It cannot be written nevertheless," manages to say something true. That tension, between the impossibility of the task and the necessity of attempting it, is not a failure of nerve. It is the whole point. To hold the limitation clearly in view and speak anyway. To know that the map is not the territory, and to draw the map as carefully as you can. That discipline, quiet and almost invisible, threads through everything that follows. Chapter 2. The Effort That Undoes Itself. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from working too hard, but from working in the wrong direction. You recognize it. The night before an important conversation when sleep will not come, no matter how still you lie. The dinner party, where you are determined to be charming, and find yourself more wooden with every passing hour. The creative project you have been forcing for weeks, the one that was flowing naturally before you decided it needed to be good. Something in the mechanism of effort itself produces the opposite of what effort intends. The Tao Te Ching has a name for the principle that governs this: Wu Wei. Effortless action, non-forcing. Wu Wei is not laziness. That misreading has sent a lot of people in the wrong direction. It is not the philosophy of the person who stays in bed because the universe will handle everything. It is something considerably more demanding. The capacity to act with exactly the force the situation requires, no more and no less, timed to when the situation is ready to receive it. A master carpenter does not force the chisel through wood grain. He feels where the wood wants to open and follows that. The action is not passive. It is precise. The self-defeating quality of excessive effort appears everywhere once you start looking. The salesperson who needs the commission too badly closes fewer sales. The writer who tries too hard to be profound produces sentences that announce their own importance. The athlete who tightens under pressure performs below the level their relaxed practice would suggest. In each case, effort is not the problem. Misdirected effort, effort applied against the natural grain of the situation, creates a friction that consumes the very energy it was meant to deploy. There is a line in the Tao Te Ching that reads, "In pursuing knowledge, every day something is added. In pursuing the Tao, every day something is dropped." This is not anti-intellectual. It is describing two different kinds of learning. One kind accumulates. The other kind clears. The accumulated kind, facts, frameworks, credentials, techniques, can become a wall between you and what is actually happening in front of you. You filter the present through a catalog of past experience. The expert who cannot see what the beginner sees because they are too busy recognizing is suffering from this. Consider how children play. There is no gap between intention and action. No monitoring voice checking whether the play is going well or whether anyone is watching. The energy is unimpeded. Then the monitoring voice arrives. Slowly, through years of being evaluated and compared and corrected, and the gap opens. Part of what Taoist practice attempts to recover is the action that happens before the gap. Not by returning to childhood, but by developing a relationship with the monitoring voice so intimate that it stops interfering. The Taoist sage, in this reading, is not someone who has achieved a special state. She is someone who has stopped creating the specific friction that was never necessary. She has dropped the extra weight. Her action carries no wasted motion. The result looks effortless because it is. Not because nothing is being done, but because nothing unnecessary is being added. What you stop doing turns out to matter as much as what you do. Chapter 3. What water knows. Water has no ambition. It does not try to flow downhill. It simply does, because that is what water is. It does not choose to take the shape of its container. It does not decide to yield when it meets an obstacle and seek another path. These things are not decisions. They are the expression of water's nature, and water's nature happens to be, across sufficient time, more powerful than stone. The Grand Canyon is water's patience made visible. 2 billion years of patience. The Colorado River asked nothing of the canyon walls except to pass. The Tao Te Ching holds water up as the closest thing the visible world offers to the Tao itself. It benefits all things without contending. It seeks the low places that people disdain. It is the softest substance and the most persistent force. Western thinking, for most of its history, has associated strength with hardness, with the soldier's armor, the negotiator's firm position, the manager's decisive manner. Taoism looks at the same world and sees something different. It sees that the hard falls before the soft given enough time. The rigid breaks where the supple bends. You may have lived this without naming it. Think of the argument you won by agreeing with part of what the other person said. The negotiation that moved forward only after you stopped insisting. The relationship that improved not because you pushed for change, but because you stopped resisting what was already there. In each of these, something yielded, and in yielding, accomplished what force was failing to accomplish. The move is counterintuitive enough that most people need to rediscover it repeatedly, because every instinct says to push harder when pushing is not working. The water principle has a tactical dimension that Chinese strategic thought developed with particular care. The general who appears weak lures the enemy into overextending. The advisor who seems foolish makes no enemies among the powerful. The one who does not compete for position cannot be displaced from it. These are not tricks. They are recognitions about how energy moves through human systems. Recognition that displaying strength invites matching strength, while apparent weakness invites no response at all. But there is something deeper here than strategy. Water does not yield strategically. It yields because yielding is its nature, and its nature happens to make it indestructible. The Taoist aspiration is not to learn a new technique called yielding and deploy it cleverly. It is to develop a character that yields as naturally as water does, not as a tactic but as an expression of what you fundamentally are. The technique and the character are different things. Technique can be defeated when the opponent realizes what you are doing. Character cannot. The Tao Te Ching offers this. The sage does not contend, and therefore no one can contend with her. This is not a paradox. It is an observation about where resistance actually lives. You cannot push against water. There is nothing to push against. The stone never learns this. The water does not need to. Chapter 4. The usefulness of nothing. A bowl is not useful because of what it is made of. 30 spokes converge on a hub, says the Tao Te Ching, but it is the hole in the center that makes the wheel work. Clay is shaped into a vessel, but it is the empty space inside that makes the vessel useful. Walls are built and a roof raised, but it is the hollow interior that makes a house a house. The text is making a point about function that sounds simple until you sit with it. What is present creates the form, and what is absent creates the use. The empty space is not a deficit. It is the point. This is easy to hear and almost impossible to hold on to, because everything in the way we are trained to think runs against it. We count assets, not absences. We measure what is there, not what has been left out. A resume lists what you have done, not the spaces you preserved. A schedule is filled with commitments, with white space treated as waste. The full calendar is the productive calendar. The empty afternoon is the one you have to justify. The Taoist looks at this and sees something else. She sees a schedule so dense it has no room to respond to what actually arrives. A mind so full of opinions it cannot perceive the situation in front of it. A conversation in which both people are waiting to speak rather than listening. So the exchange produces noise but no contact. The fullness is what prevents function. The emptiness is what would allow it. There is a practice, very simple and very difficult, that comes directly from this understanding. It is to sit without an agenda and let whatever arises arise. Not to be productive, not to solve anything. To be, as the text says, like an empty valley that receives all things without preference. The practice is almost physically uncomfortable for people trained in perpetual activity, because it feels like waste. The discomfort is itself informative. It reveals how thoroughly the culture has convinced you that empty time is failed time. The mind full of certainty cannot be surprised. The expert so thoroughly versed in how things work cannot notice when things are working differently. Beginner's mind, as the Zen tradition names it, the willingness to encounter each situation as if for the first time, is not ignorance. It is the preservation of the empty space that allows genuine perception. The beginner sees what the expert's knowledge has taught her not to see. Emptiness is not nothing. It is potential. It is the space in which something other than the expected can occur. The wheel that has no hole in the hub cannot turn at all. Chapter 5. The seed inside the opposite. Everything carries its opposite inside it, dormant, waiting. The yin-yang symbol is one of the most widely reproduced images in the world, and one of the most routinely misread. People see two halves of a circle, black and white, and understand duality. This side and that side, opposites arranged in balance. But the symbol's intelligence is in the detail that usually gets lost in reproduction. Each half contains a small circle of the other color at its fullest point. The black at its darkest contains a white seed. The white at its brightest contains a black seed. The message is not balance. The message is that every extreme already contains its reversal. The Tao Te Ching returns to this again and again in different images. When the great Tao is forgotten, kindness and morality arise. This is not cynicism about virtue. It is an observation about systems. Explicit moral instruction becomes necessary only when natural goodness has eroded. The louder a society becomes about its values, the more those values are already in trouble. The therapy industry grows where family and community have contracted. The wellness movement expands where ordinary life has become unwell. The cure announces the disease. This pattern operates at every scale. The leader who insists most forcefully on loyalty is usually the one who has given people the least reason to be loyal. The relationship in which love is constantly performed is often the one in which love is quietly draining away. The company that talks most about innovation is frequently the one most resistant to actual change. The intensity of the declaration is proportional to the anxiety about whether the thing being declared is still true. The practical consequence of understanding this is a kind of weather sense about human situations. When you see something at its peak, a career, a relationship, a business model, a cultural moment, the Taoist impulse is not celebration but alertness. The peak already contains the seed of the turn. This is not pessimism. It is timing. It tells you not to overinvest at the crest, not to despair at the trough. The cycle is not punishment. It is information. Strength overextended becomes rigidity, and rigidity breaks. Weakness, correctly understood, becomes flexibility, and flexibility endures. The hard stone and the soft water, we have already seen where that ends. The tree that cannot bend in the storm is the one that falls. The person who cannot be wrong is the one who stops learning. The organization that cannot fail is the one that has stopped trying anything real. There is a freedom in this understanding that is easy to miss. If success carries its own correction, you do not need to cling to it. If failure carries its own renewal, you do not need to flee from it. You can be in either condition without your identity depending on which one it is. The seed is always there. You can learn to feel it. Chapter 6. Before the carving. The Tao Te Ching speaks of a block of uncarved wood. In Chinese, the word is pu, raw simplicity, the thing before it has been shaped into anything in particular. It is not formlessness. The wood has its own grain, its own nature, its own weight. But it has not yet been made into a table or a wheel or a statue. It retains all its possibilities because none of them has been chosen yet. The uncarved block is the Tao Te Ching's image for the state a person is in, before culture finishes with them, before the particular shaping that turns a child into a role, a type, a category. Watch a very young child encounter something unfamiliar. There is a quality of pure attention in the looking, no framework of what this should be, no quick categorization, no reaching for the right response, just the object and the looking. Adults watch this and feel something they would struggle to name. It is the recognition of something they once had and have mostly lost. Not intelligence. Children are not more intelligent than adults. It is contact, direct, unmediated contact with what is actually there. The Tao Te Ching uses the image of the infant repeatedly. Can you keep your soul like that of a newborn child? The infant's bones are soft, its muscles weak, yet its grip is fierce. It has not yet developed the armoring, the held breath, the tightened shoulders, the careful management of how it appears, that adults build across decades of being evaluated and adjusted and improved. The vitality that comes through the infant is unobstructed, because there is as yet nothing obstructing it. The goal is not to return to infancy. That would be regression, not cultivation. The infant's completeness comes from not yet having been separated from the natural flow of things. But the infant also lacks awareness, discrimination, the ability to act with knowledge of what is happening. The Taoist aspiration combines what the infant has with what the adult develops, the naturalness of before with the awareness of after, sophisticated simplicity as distinct from mere simplicity. This is considerably more difficult than either pole alone. It requires a kind of double attention, functioning fully as an adult, with all the capabilities that implies, while simultaneously maintaining contact with something prior to all that functioning. A musician who plays with complete technical command and also plays like someone who has never learned to be self-conscious. An executive who thinks with full strategic complexity and also responds to the person in front of her rather than the category that person represents. The carving has already happened. You are not the uncarved block, but the grain of the wood is still there, underneath. The Taoist work is not to uncarve what has been shaped. It is to feel back toward the grain, and then to move with it rather than against it. The block contains the form. The artist's job is to remove what does not belong. Chapter 7. The Crooked Tree. Chuang Tzu was walking with a student through the mountains when they came across an enormous tree. Its trunk was so thick it would have taken 10 men with linked arms to encircle it. Its branches spread wide enough to shade several hundred oxen. The student was impressed. He said, "It must be a remarkable tree to have grown so large." Chuang Tzu looked at it differently. He said, "It grew this large because it is useless. A carpenter would find no good lumber in those twisted, knotted branches. A boat builder would not want it. A coffin maker would pass it by. Because it was good for nothing that men found profitable, it was left alone long enough to become what it became. The tree was useless, and its uselessness was its protection. Think about the people you know who fit perfectly into every category that the economy values: productive, efficient, credentialed, available. The ones whose phones are always answered, whose calendars are always full, whose competence attracts a steady accumulation of other people's demands. They are the straight trees. They are also, very often, the ones who are quietly exhausted in a way they cannot fully explain, because everything they are has been allocated to purposes that were never entirely their own. There is a different failure mode that gets less attention. The person who cannot quite be slotted, whose skills do not map cleanly onto a job title, whose interests cut across too many domains, whose way of working resists the standard categories. This person has a harder time. Institutions do not know what to do with them. But they are also harder to use up. Their crookedness is, in the tree's sense, protective. What cannot be harvested cannot be depleted. Chuang Tzu told another story about a tree that had grown massive and ancient in the courtyard of a temple. Carpenters had passed it for generations. It was sacred, and also, they said, worthless as timber. Then one carpenter, older and more patient than the rest, stopped and looked at it properly. He realized the tree was perfectly shaped to become the frame of a great bell stand. Its very uselessness for ordinary lumber had made it uniquely suited for this one extraordinary purpose. The limitation and the gift were the same thing. You may carry something like this: some quality that does not fit the standard categories, that has made certain doors close and others never open. Taoism does not offer comfort exactly. It does not say that every crooked tree finds its bell stand. What it says is that categories are human constructs, and human constructs do not exhaust the possibilities. The quality that makes you unsuitable for one purpose may be precisely what makes you essential for another. The question is whether you spend your energy trying to straighten, or whether you grow in the direction your nature already tends. Chuang Tzu also recorded a dream. In the dream he was a butterfly with no awareness that it had ever been Chuang Tzu. When he woke, he could not determine whether he was a man who had dreamed of being a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming of being a man. He held this uncertainty without resolving it. The self that seems so solid and fixed, the self that either fits or does not fit the categories, may be more like a dream than we are comfortable believing. Held lightly enough, that self can change without threatening the essential thing underneath it. The carpenters walked past the old tree for 100 years. The tree did not mind. Chapter 8. Governing by Disappearing. There is an old line in the Tao Te Ching that reads like a recipe rather than philosophy. Govern a great nation as you would cook a small fish. The instruction is about restraint, about the specific harm of overdoing it. A small fish cooked with too much handling, too much intervention, too many adjustments, falls apart. The flesh breaks. What required a light touch has been destroyed by an earnest one. The cook who cannot stop improving produces nothing worth eating. The Tao Te Ching arranges rulers in a hierarchy. The worst are those who dominate through fear. People obey them, but hate them. Somewhat better are those who lead through rewards and incentives. People perform for them, but calculate privately. Better still are those who lead through example. People respect them and try to match them. Best of all are those who lead so lightly that when the work is finished and the goal is reached, the people say, "We did this ourselves." That last kind of leadership is almost invisible. It looks, from the outside, like nothing much happening. And perhaps this is why it is so rare, because the person capable of it receives no credit, no obvious acknowledgement of their skill, no moment at which anyone turns and says, "It was you." The visible leader gets monuments. The leader who governed by disappearing gets the outcome and the silence. This scales down precisely. The parent who micromanages the child's homework produces a child who cannot do homework without being micromanaged. The manager who cannot delegate produces a team that has no initiative, and then points to the team's lack of initiative as the reason they cannot delegate. The therapist who tells clients what to do produces clients who need to be told. In every case, the intervention that was meant to help has colonized the space where the other person's capability would have grown. The same principle governs the self. If you run your inner life as a harsh regime, impossible standards, punishments for failure, constant monitoring of whether you are meeting your own requirements, you produce exactly the internal rebellion and exhaustion you were trying to prevent. The strict self-governor exhausts themselves fighting their own nature. The light self-governor, who maintains a minimal structure and leaves room for natural inclination, discovers that much of what they were forcing emerges on its own when the force is removed. The Tao Te Ching identifies a particular warning sign. When a society needs to loudly teach and enforce virtue, it has already lost it. The elaborate moral campaign is the symptom, not the cure. Natural goodness does not require instruction. It requires conditions. Conditions in which people are not so consumed by struggle, competition, and survival that their natural capacity for decency has no space to operate. The ruler who creates those conditions has governed well. The ruler who instead writes laws and builds enforcement mechanisms has diagnosed the problem and made it worse. The fish does not benefit from being handled. Chapter 9. The nature of each thing. The second character in the title of the Tao Te Ching is Te. It is usually translated as virtue, or power, or integrity. None of these quite captures it. Te is the particular expression of the Tao in each individual thing, the specific nature, the inherent character, the way a thing most fully becomes itself. Water's T is to flow downward and yield. Fire's T is to rise and transform. The pine tree's T is not the oak tree's T, and the oak tree is not a failed pine. Each has its own complete nature, and the divergence is not error. This sounds like a benign truism until you consider what it implies for how we treat people. The teacher who applies one method to every student is violating T, not abstractly, but practically, in the specific learning style of each child who cannot absorb what is being offered in that form. The manager, who evaluates every employee against the same template of the ideal worker, is missing the particular strengths that do not fit the template. The parent who has a clear vision of what their child should become and pursues it with love and determination is, by that determination, obscuring something real. When you live against your own Te, performing a version of yourself calibrated to what is expected rather than what is actual, you do not simply feel inauthentic. You lose power. Something in the system degrades. Energy that would move freely begins to encounter internal resistance. The divided person, the one whose outer expression and inner nature are not in alignment, works harder for less result, because part of the effort is being consumed by the division itself. The Tao Te Ching describes this with an image. It says that when T is present, governing happens without effort. When T is absent, effort multiplies to compensate. The person aligned with their own nature does not need to push. Their action has the quality of water finding its level, not forced, but inexorable. Discovering your T is not the same as discovering what you want. Wanting is often shaped by the same conditioning that obscures T. You want what the culture has taught you to want, what your family expected, what the people you admire appear to possess. Te is prior to that. It is not constructed, it is uncovered. The Taoist image is the sculptor who does not impose a form on the stone, but removes what is not the form already hidden there. The oak does not compete with the pine for what kind of tree to be. It does not look at the pine and feel inadequate for lacking needles. It grows in the direction its nature already tends, and in doing so occupies exactly the place in the forest that only it could occupy. The forest is richer for both of them. Neither diminishes the other. There is no hierarchy of trees. The person who has found their tea does not need to be exceptional in any comparative sense. They simply need to be exactly what they are, without subtraction or performance. This turns out to be more than enough. Chapter 10. The Return. Everything eventually comes back to where it started. Day becomes night. Breath goes out and returns. The river reaches the sea and rises again as cloud and falls again as rain on the mountains it came from. Spring arrives at the point summer has vacated, and winter arrives at the point autumn has cleared. These cycles do not feel like repetition from the inside because each pass-through is different. You are different. The world is different. What you understand is different. The spiral returns to the same direction, but at a different elevation. The Tao Te Ching calls this returning to the root. It says, "The 10,000 things arise, and I watch their return." Things flourish and flourish, but each returns to its root. Returning to the root is called stillness. This is not quietism or withdrawal. It is a description of what underlies all the activity. Beneath the 10,000 things moving and changing and arising and dissolving, there is something that does not change. The wave rises and falls. The ocean remains. The practical consequence of understanding this is a particular kind of stability that is not the same as being unmoved. The person who understands the cycle does not lose themselves in success, because they know success contains its own correction. They do not lose themselves in failure, because they know failure contains its own renewal. They can be fully in either condition, without their fundamental orientation, depending on which one it is. This is equanimity, not the absence of feeling, but the presence of a perspective that feeling does not overwhelm. The Tao Te Ching addresses death with unusual directness. It does not promise personal survival. It does not offer consolation of the ordinary kind. What it says is closer to this. If you identify completely with your particular form, this body, this name, this history, then the dissolution of that form will seem like annihilation. But if you recognize that what you essentially are was never separate from the Tao to begin with, then death becomes a change of form rather than the end of being. The wave does not cease when it breaks. It returns to what it always was. This does not require belief. It requires a certain quality of attention. The attention that can hold the personal and the impersonal simultaneously, that can be fully present in this specific body, with all its history and particularity, while also sensing the much larger pattern in which this body is a temporary intensification. Both are true at once. Neither cancels the other. Chuang Tzu, when his wife died, was found sitting and singing. His friend came and said, "She lived with you, she raised your children, she grew old with you. Not to mourn is enough, but to sing?" Chuang Tzu said, "When she first died, I felt the loss. But when I considered what she was before she was born, before she had a body, before she had a spirit, I realized that mixed in the jumble of wonder and mystery, something changed and she had a spirit. Another change and she had a body. Another change and she was born. Now another change and she is dead. She is like the seasons turning. To weep and wail would be to say, I don't understand the process of change." The story is not an argument for suppressing grief. It is an argument for a larger frame, one in which grief has its place and change is not the enemy. The sage practices returning to source throughout life, not only at death. Periodic withdrawal from complexity into simplicity. Regular return to center when pulled away from it. Each return refreshes, not because it is an escape, but because it reconnects you to the pattern that was there before the complexity began. The final line of the Tao Te Ching belongs to this movement. Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. We have been speaking for some time. All of these words, if they have worked at all, have pointed away from themselves, towards something in your own direct experience that does not require further explanation. The measure is not whether you have understood something. The measure is whether anything in the way you move through tomorrow is different. That is what the old man left at the border. Not a doctrine, a direction. 2,500 years is a long time for a question to stay open. But the questions Laozi carried up into the mountains are the same questions you carry into your work, your relationships, your quiet hours. Whether effort is always the answer. Whether strength is always what it appears to be. Whether the self you perform daily is the same as the self underneath the performance. Whether there is a way to act in the world that does not exhaust the world or exhaust you. These are not ancient questions. They are this morning's questions. If this has shifted something, even slightly, even provisionally, stay. There is more coming. And leave me with this one thing to sit with tonight. If you could stop doing one thing that you do not actually need to do, one thing that effort has made habitual and habit has made invisible, what would it be? The old man did not answer that for you. He knew better.